The rest of this file is not so exciting. There's a bit here where basically you can choose what the title will be on the bar if you're using a windowed mode, and I believe also it will be the hover title if somebody hovers over the icon on your taskbar. So you're running the game and you're like on Windows and you hover over a bar and you get a little pop-up title or something like that. That's not a good example. Like this, the journal, right? So that's the name. So if this were our game, it would be Top-Down Shooter 1. Okay, haven't shown you anything yet that's exciting.
Before you go off, though, whatever I was going to say, the words, the different languages. So go back out to that.
Sure.
Well, maybe your screen hasn't. My screen hasn't refreshed yet. Anyway, it's got these values there, right? Are those just notes, or is that actual values that you're setting, or what is that?
I've got them commented out because I wanted to leave them in here for people to see them. But yeah, these are actual encodings that they'll detect, and then you can put an alternative language title in here if you wish.
Interesting.
So if I spoke French, I would put Top-Down Shooter in French, and I would enable that, but it would still show in English because I'm. But
this is just something that's in the build settings that it's going to detect.
Yeah,
it's not something that we're.
A little thing that made it into the build settings. I think that they're probably going to expand upon this concept later. So this is like probably the beginnings of localization for desktop.
Okay.
So this is a good minimum subset. Beyond that, you're kind of responsible within the game yourself. In fact, I don't know which of the localization features actually work within desktop or not. I haven't explored that. But I'm guessing if they're able to discover your region like this, then the other Corona features that allow you to discover region by querying it, those should work. And then you can make appropriate decisions based on that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Sergey is kind of shaking his head there, so I think he agrees with me. But I'm always watching, Sergey. Okay, so let's talk about this. Windowed versus non-windowed, because it's a subtle and yet important decision. So what I've got here, first of all, is config.
Quick question.
Yeah, shoot.
Does Corona now support switching from full screen to windowed mode at runtime?
Yes. In fact, I'm going to show that.
Awesome.
Yes. I forgot to mention that. Good question. So, whoops, that's not the right code. Let's look at the right code. Okay, let's bring up the wrong code twice. Okay, so as we were talking about this, you can set all of these values in here, but you can also programmatically change the windowing mode at any time. So these are what's going to happen when the game starts. But if you wish, there are ways to programmatically change to maximize, normal. I'm not sure if you can change the scale later to like resize the window. I haven't explored that, but you can definitely change between windowed and full screen and maximized and normal, which is really just saying go back to wherever you were last in windowed mode. Okay, sorry. Okay, so the example we're running now is the one we were just looking at, which was config testing. And this is a very basic example that shows basically some colored blocks are abutting. They are next to the edges of the screen. So what this thing has done, this program, has discovered the upper left, upper right, lower left, and center, and then it's drawn some lines. So you can look at it and go, yep, that's centered, and everything looks good. So I have built this project in two different ways using, and it's worth noting at this point, that everything we're going to do in this project will use SSK, because SSK has some features in it that give me the ability to do things quickly, very easily, that otherwise it would be very hard for me to write the demo code up as we explore lots of ideas. Now, having said that, once we have explored some ideas and made decisions about how we want this game to go, I will longhand code the parts that we have decided on so that the final game, people can see how it was done without having to dig into SSK. But personally for me, if we do 10 different explorations or we do tweaks and mess around with ideas, or even during the week when I'm working on this, it's way too much work for me to do everything longhand, what I consider longhand. So I will be using a lot of SSK shortcuts and power methods and stuff like that to do things in the exploration code. And among those, SSK comes with a ability to rediscover the size of the screen. Now this is already in Corona, but I use shorthand notation for these things, and so SSK comes with a flag that you can set that says, should I rediscover the size of the world if you resize the screen? Because that's a decision you need to make early on. Do I stay with a fixed size and assume that it never changes? Or do I change things and assume that it will change and discover that every time it does? So let me show you what happens if you choose either way. Where is my code? Here it is. Okay, it's probably a little hard to see here, but I've already pre-compiled 2 versions of this project. One of them is called Config1 Auto Adjust, where I turned on the auto adjusting feature. And the other one is no auto adjust. Now what this is saying is no auto adjust says assume that the resolution stays the same forever, even if they resize the application. Now if we assume that and I run this, it's going to come up. So let me get rid of the simulator. So this is actually the desktop version. Top-down shooter 1. It comes up at 640 by 960 and everything looks great, right? However, let's drag the corner and see what happens. Okay, that seems pretty good. Everything kind of did what we wanted, except now we're getting kind of like this weird gap here. So some of the content in my screen area is not quite where I want it. This should be in the upper left, and yet there's a gap. In fact, there's a gap over here. What this is telling me is that the aspect ratio no longer matches my design space, and it's doing everything right, but maybe this isn't the right thing for my game. I know this is kind of a subtle concept, but imagine, if you will, that you're writing a business application and you always want there to be a bar at the top with some buttons and stuff. You don't want people to be able to drag that and then have there be gaps, which is exactly what would happen if you did not account for it. You did not watch for the resize event and do something about it. Another thing is when you run this, by the way, there's keyboard shortcuts, and I will put a README in the folder so people can see what they are. But if we hit Control-Enter, which is a standard keyboard combination for full screen, swapping full screen, it'll flop between full screen and windowed mode. So I just hit Control-Enter again. It went back to windowed mode. Hit it again, which answers Sergey's earlier question. I'm flip-flopping between windowed and full screen. Now we can see a real problem here. It's in full screen mode, and clearly 640 by 960 is at a different aspect ratio than 1920 by 1080, which is what my monitor is. This is not what I want for my game. Let's just say. Let's say that for this demo, what I really wanted was I wanted these lines to extend. I wanted this content to get moved over and everything to be still in the corners and in the centers and everything looking right. So what I did was I flipped a switch in SSK. I did 2 things. I flipped a switch in SSK that said, when the screen size changes, discover this, notice this, and recalculate your view of the world so that you know where the left side of the screen is and the right side of the screen. All the shorthand tools that I have in SSK get updated. Additionally, and I'll show you the code in a minute, the code that draws this says, oh, you just resized the screen. Let me redraw that. So if you have a game or an application where redrawing the screen is okay, this is a good approach. You simply redraw it and you're good.